There is this saying that isn't necessarily a Texas saying, but it is a very Texas saying because I find it applies a lot. Texans like spinning a good yarn, and that saying is never let the truth get in the way of a good story. A perfect example of that was yesterday. In fact, I'll post a video about this tomorrow so you can see what I'm talking about. But over the weekend, I was invited by a family that's very good friends with my wife's family to this whole sort of thing where basically it's a big thing they do every year where they get a pig, a large pig, and then they slaughter the pig, they prepare the pig as a family, and then it gets cooked all day, and they invite, like, at the end of the day, like, there's 200 people, and everybody eats pork and drinks beer. And it was a lot of fun. But the legend of this pig grew throughout the day. Like, to begin with, at the very beginning of the day, when it turned up, it's like, oh, that's a pig's like 450-pound pig. Wow, that's 450 pounds. And then, like, as we're sort of like preparing it, we're like, we're all having to join in to get the pig ready to be cooked and stuff like that. And by that point, it's, I don't know if you guys have heard, but this is like a 530-pound pig. By the time everything had been cooked and everybody's turned up and I came back to the event later in the day, that point, it was now a 590-pound pig. But I tell you what, I pretty much believe it because they were feeding a good 200 people with it. But that's the thing. As it goes on, the legend grew. It's even about when it came to slaughtering it. They was like, oh man, I don't know if you heard, but it took like 4 bullets for it to, finally admit that it was dead. 2 hours later, I don't know if you heard, Ollie, but it took something like a dozen bullets to take this down. By the time the evening came around, you would believe that John Wick himself had slaughtered this pig, that it had taken 7,000 rounds, it yet bravely fought on before eventually, I guess, dying of lead poisoning. But this is what I mean. Never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Like, I was just watching this movie. It's called Walking Tall. It's a 1970s movie with Joe Don Baker, and he's playing this real-life sheriff that was infamous for going around with a big stick and beating people up with a big stick. So infamous, in fact, they made 2 sequels to that movie. Then they remade it with The Rock. Then they made some other ones with Kevin Sorbo. And in every single version of this movie, he walks around with a massive stick and beats people over the head with it. Except his daughter, who wrote his biography, was like, yeah, that's not true. But who cares? The legend is way cooler. It was a really good movie, actually. It's very, very strange and violent for a 70s movie. And when you actually read the history, the true story behind it, it is even crazier than the movie lets on. I was watching that movie. I also watched Inherit the Wind, an amazing movie from the 1960s, set in the 1920s, that is exactly what is happening in America in 2024. It was really crazy and a really interesting watch. And I also watched Hustle and Flow because I also do a movie podcast, The United States of a Movie, where every week we try to find one movie to define each state in the United States. This week, it was Tennessee. So if you want to find out which of those movies we decided was the most Tennessee, you can find us on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. You can watch us on YouTube. But also, what are some of the great yarns that you've heard? I once caught a fish this big, and then the legend ended up growing. Are other states better at lying in stories than Texas? I want to know. Drop them in the comments.